an entrepreneurship support organization driven by social change, and of course, the idea that businesses and profits must be used in the service of people and for the planet. When we consider the entrepreneurship, when we considered several entrepreneurship catchphrases or common sayings that describe the three organizations in this consortium, we descriptively summarized our collective missions as such. We say that the typical Kenyan experience is that hundreds of thousands of hardworking entrepreneurs spend their energy in motion. And sometimes, just because we're doing a lot more, it doesn't mean that we're getting a lot more done. We should distinguish movement from progress. And we aspire as a consortium to make a difference. So this collaboration between ISBI at Strathmore, the Kijiji, and Sacco Innovation is implementing an entrepreneur-centered program intervention for the WhiteBox initiative. Hopefully our approach, of course, will lead to further progress and impact. Once again, to our esteemed guests, our entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this official launch, and thank you. Over to you, Janet.
All right. Thank you so much, Marianne. I don't think anyone would have done it any better. And thank you for introducing us to today's session. Now, before we continue into the rigorous part of today's program, I'd just like us to watch something short, something sweet, enough to keep us a little more engaged as we continue into today's session. Now, I'd like to have, I'm going to have the screen shared so that we can showcase a video on the WhiteBox Entrepreneurs Program. Josephine, if you could kindly share your screen. Okay. Let me just check that. All right. I can see the screen has started to share. Okay. Sorry, Josephine, I can't hear the sound at the moment. All right, great. I think it's right on point now. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Josephine. I hope you all enjoyed that little snippet into what the White program is, the WhiteBox program is, sorry. Yes, now we'd like to move on into what we've all been waiting for, the panel discussion in today's session. And we'll have the panel discussion moderated by Dr. James Wanjagi. The panel is of our distinguished guests. I will let James introduce that, but I'd just like to mention a little bit about him. And he is a lecturer within the Strathmore University Business School, holds a degree in organizational management, leadership specialization, and he's a seasoned senior level executive, certified project management professional, change management, communication strategist, and an IT technology strategist. He's also the president of the Project Management Institute. Welcome, Dr. Jagi.
Thank you very much, Janet. Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Dr. James Wanjagi, and I will be your moderator for this section. And welcome to all our panelists. Welcome all of our participants, all protocols observed. I'd like to jump right into our panel discussion. And the theme for our panel discussion is the Kenya entrepreneurship ecosystem, looking back at our past growth, and then really asking ourselves, where do we go from here? So when you think about Vision 2030 for our country, we have about 10 years left. And so then the question is, how far have we come? And what do we need to do in the next 2 years to achieve some of the aspirations that we have in our entrepreneurship ecosystem, innovation landscape? With me, I have a number of panelists that will be helping us answer some of the questions, providing perspective, sharing some of their insights, and I'd like to introduce them in no particular order. I will start with Andrietta Muforo, who's a partner at TLCom Capital, and there she is on the screen. And she's Telcom as an organization has managed in excess of about $300 million and is currently investing from its Tide Africa Fund, which invests in early to grow stage organizations supporting enterprises that are building fast growth, tech-enabled businesses and solving complex challenges. Andrietta, welcome. And
thank you. Good morning.
Was about money. What we've done is identified five critical factors that we need to address, and Andrietta will speak to us about money, and I'll cue in when she can pick up a conversation. Second person I'd like to introduce is Alex Kamanga, founder of Fundis. And Fundis is an organization, a startup that, and there he is on the screen. Welcome, Alex. Fundi offers a mobile application for workplaces to find and hire high-quality fundis, handymen, manual laborers, quickly and affordably. Their product provides online billing and matchmaking as part of the app. In addition, they've partnered with banks and insurance providers to provide value-added services to the fundis. And the reason that they joined the WhiteBox program was to partner with government in digitizing the informal sector. And we've asked Alex to focus on the people as part of the five critical factors that we think we should address. And I'll cue in Alex on when to have that conversation. The third person that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Catherine Getao, EBS, who's the CEO of ICT Authority. Welcome, Dr. Catherine. Karibu sana. And she is driving the state corporation that's under the Ministry of Information, Communication and Technology. It was established in 2013, and one of their mandates is to promote ICT literacy, capacity innovation and enterprises. And so their vision is around transforming lives using ICT. The mission is just to champion and harness ICT to enable efficient and effective access in delivery of public service for wealth creation and well-being for Kenya. Dr. Catherine Gitau will talk about the government perspective around how then do we drive this entrepreneurship ecosystem. Karibu, Catherine, and I'll cue in when to just make your comments. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Sheena. Sheena is the director at the UK Tech, actually UK Kenya Tech Hub. And this is an innovative and high-profile tech hub in Kenya. And their aim is to develop Kenyan tech ecosystem and deliver digital skills programs and build linkages between Kenya and the international societies and organizations, including UK tech businesses. Karibu sana Sheena, and Sheena will be discussing the know-how, and I'll introduce you, Sheena, and when you can give us your perspectives. Last but not least is Mr. Jack Ngare. Jack, Karibu, is on the screen. He's the MD for Microsoft Africa Development Center Corporate. And Microsoft launched its first African Development Center, ADC, in 2019 May. And with 2 initial sites in Nairobi, Kenya, and Lagos, Nigeria, the ADC was poised to serve as a premier center for engineering for Microsoft, where world-class African talent can create solutions for local and global impact. Mr. Jack Gary will be focusing on the network part of the critical factors that we think should drive this entrepreneurship ecosystem. Karibu sana, Jack.
Thanks.
So I believe all panelists had an opportunity to complete the information or the guiding information that was shared with them. And the guiding information included identifying where we are now using a rating system, and then really answering the question, why do you select the rating, it's 1 to 5, why do you select the rating number that you select, and what should we do for the next 10 years, focus on for the next 10 years. And so, and any other information that you really would like to share with us. What I'd like to do is to start with Alex. I'll start with the people part. And so, Alex, the first question for you is, where does the Kenya ecosystem fall, level 1 to 5? And you already have some of these guiding questions. And then, as an ecosystem, we have about 10 years. What should we start focusing on to grow our human capital or people around the entrepreneur and innovation ecosystem? So I'll mute and stop my video. And then Alex, please go ahead and share your thoughts.
All right, thank you, Dr. James, and hi everyone from wherever you're plugging in from. And for me particularly, I count it up, a huge privilege to be sharing in on this call and looking back, because I've been in the Kenyan tech startup ecosystem about 6 years now, 2 years running the current company we have from this, and 4 more working for other different early stage founders that are still in this space and doing really well. But to answer more specifically to Dr. James' question, in terms of where, as an ecosystem we are, and thinking at level 1 from an entrepreneurial very early stage starting, and level 5 being the expertise level, in my view, and basing it on the experience that I have really had the last 6 years, we are at an experimental stage. Experimental stage because a lot of things are changing and changing for the better. I remember, 2014, 2015, when I was fresh out of the university, and it was really a cool thing to, showcase your business card that you are a co-founder of this and a co-founder of that. And it was really amazing back then because things were taking shape. Incubators, accelerators, advisory programs for early stage founders. But looking at where we are now, that's about 6 years now. I feel systems have been more established now. If I think from the people perspective, and especially as an innovator, and an innovator means for me boots on ground, we have made tremendous progress. Tremendous progress in that right now, there is a functional relationship between what you would have traditionally as academia. And I remember in my university days, once my entrepreneurship lecturer nearly kicked me out of class because I asked him if he had in fact ever run any business in his life, and he didn't take that question kindly. But at the point where we are today, I see a very intentional relationship between the academia world, between established corporations that are out there running, and between startup founders and early stage founders. And I think this is really interesting for me because a lot of these linkages are happening at a time when there is no one divide that can work completely in isolation. So for instance, if you think about entrepreneurs, and considering myself as one of those, we have for a very long time wanted what I would call real education and real entrepreneurial training for the real business world. Stuff that works, stuff that you can be able to apply on a day-to-day basis to grow your venture from one level to the next. But on the other hand, if you think from, for instance, the investment side, that as well has been changing over time in that there is a more functional relationship around, VCs also, and whether it's impact investors or investors for a return, even extending what I have always, really loved as patient capital and giving us that time to build the solution. Because from a people's perspective, we have been focusing on providing real solutions for real people. Things that solve and make people's life easier on a day-to-day basis. In fact, one of the reasons why as Fundis we ended up entering into this, WhiteBox program, because of the various mixes of resources that are in there. So I think right now we are at that experimental stage. Entrepreneurs are thriving. The education for them, the training for them is a bit relevant. There is a working relationship between investors and all these venture builders, whether it's incubators, accelerators, or advisory programs. That is working. And I think going forward, there will be lots and lots of progress in that. As long as these segments are working and working in tandem, there will be lots and lots of solutions that actually meet real people's lives. So, Dr. James, to answer your question, I think we are at an experimental stage. I think what we have today as the Silicon Savannah is very vastly different from what Silicon Valley looks like, but we are getting there.
So Alex, thank you so much. So if we are at the experimenting level, that means that a fair amount of different startup support mechanisms exist, not only for first timers, but also for established. It would also mean that some of the startup founders are risk friendly. But so let's shift that and then ask, so what then should we do for in the next 10 years to grow the human capital so that we can then build this ecosystem as we move into Vision 2030? What are some of the things that we should be looking at from a human perspective? Over.
Yeah, right. Three things for me really stand out. In fact, my comparison, the stage we are now and what the next 5 years to 10 years will look like, I've been comparing it to being seated on a rocket that is about to launch. But three things stand out for me that I think will be very key and very instrumental to what we will have the next 5 years as an ecosystem. One, for me, I think there will needfully be that collaborative effort between the established corporation world and the startup scene. For the simple reason that I think, and in my experience the last 6 years, the rate at which startups and early stage founders are able to, ideate and build and iterate solutions is really fast. And I have not had much experience with the established corporate world, but the little interaction I have had with, I have seen the level and the pace at which new stuff gets done. So I think the next 5 years, one of the things that needs to be very intentional is around having a linkage between the established corporations and startup building together. If they need to co-create solutions one or the other, startups have the agility. The established corporations, they have the manpower, they have the resources, they have the networks, and they have tested systems that can run these things. So I think that's one of the things that will need to happen. Secondly, for me, is the role of the government. First and foremost, for me, the government as a catalyst for growth. And secondly, as the regulator. My experience has been that, and in fact, one of the things that we are really enjoying now at WhiteBox is that intentional co-creation around boots on ground as early stage founders and leaders of startups and leaders of businesses that are at that growth stage. And the policy makers, actionable data coming from boots on ground, the guys that are building solutions on a day-to-day basis, and turning those solutions to key decision makers in high places in various agencies. I think that would be very important. Thirdly, and this is where I think the magic will happen, is a training and education for entrepreneurs that is more on steroids. And that for me was the one single thing I picked and wanted to join the WhiteBox program for. In that you're not just having people that have taught all their life teaching entrepreneurs, and you're not having people who have just been building and have not taken the time to look at the research, to understand how it works, and even to think about how do you intentionally condense decades of experience into days. Because I think success leaves clues. And if we can be able to model around what those who have gone ahead of us have done and succeeded in, and figure out how to lessen the time that it takes for us early stage founders to learn and build, I think that will be a very interesting perspective. So for me, Dr. James, those would be the three things I think as an ecosystem we need to focus on the next 5 to 10 years.
Alex, thank you very much. I had linkages between startups and corporates, established corporates. I had you mention the role of government, and we have Dr. Catherine here who will speak a little bit about the role of government here shortly, policy supporting startups and how to regulate this space. And I had training and education for entrepreneurs that should be on steroids, similar to the WhiteBox program. And thank you so much, Alex, for your comments. And you well put comments and well elucidated. So let me jump into Dr. Catherine, because Alex has brought up the role of government. Dr. Catherine Karibu, and again, based on the guidance provided, really help us understand from the government perspective, where is the Kenyan innovation ecosystem today? And then secondly, what are some of the things that the government is focusing on or should focus on in the next 10 years, Dr. Catherine, so that we can then continue to build and enhance this ecosystem? Welcome, Dr. Catherine.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wanjage. Good morning to all fellow panelists and distinguished guests, our Cabinet Secretary and the Deputy High Commissioner, as well as all the participants. Where are we? I agree with Alex Mwangi that we're probably at number 3. We've already laid a fairly good foundation of the basics. We've already started building the ecosystem. And as I agree with Alex that there are many things that are working, but we cannot say that we're there yet. There's still more work to be done. What has government already done? Firstly, the name WhiteBox was the brainchild of our cabinet secretary, Joe Mochero. And he personally, and through the Ministry of ICT, the ICT Authority and other agencies, has been driving the agenda of ICT innovation from the government standpoint. And I'm glad to see that that has now found coherence with the other sectors, and there are more and more white box initiatives emerging. There's also been a lot of work on policy. The National ICT Policy has created a vision for ICT innovation. It has also created the framework for incentives for driving research and innovation in this area, for rewarding outstanding contributions, and creating funding challenges and bounties. We also have some bills, the startup bill, which also created and used the Kenya National Innovation Agency, which is another agency created by government, which will create partnerships both locally and internationally to encourage business incubation, creating online directories of startups, because I think communication is also a very important part of this, because innovations always bring something new into the ecosystem, and people need to get to know about new things as quickly as possible so that they can see their role. It also allows for the establishment of a credit guarantee scheme, because funding is, of course, one of the pain points of startups. We have a policy framework for science, technology, and innovation, and we have other institutions. We have NACOSTI. We have our public universities, which are very, very much involved, both in building capacity and also in motivating innovation and supporting innovators. Most of them now have science parks, business incubation centers, and innovation initiatives. And I know it's happening in the private universities, but I'm mentioning the public universities because they're clearly publicly funded. So the policy is there. There's still some work that needs to be done. So I'm not saying everything is there, but at least we've laid a foundation. We've also been very supportive of the innovation hubs, both the independent ones and also the ones that are growing around our public and private education institutions. ICT Authority has actually been involved in funding and offering other kinds of support, and creating forums where there can be discussions and growth of information. At the ICT Authority, we have a WhiteBox portal where innovators register. We've developed a robust system of helping them to evaluate and build their innovations in a more coherent fashion. And we have also acted as a matchmaker. Currently, we have just over 1,000 registered innovators and 246 innovations which are at various stages of our panel. And we have a small staff who work very hard. They've been involved in everything, including the COVID-19 Innovation Task Force. And they are really a very valuable part of the innovation ecosystem. What needs to be done? Obviously, we don't want to remain at level 3. We want to climb to level 4 and level 5. And I think in the time that we have available, that the most important thing we can do are two. One is to ensure that innovators have access to excellent advice and capacity building, as well as sustainable and cost-effective funding mechanisms, whether those are supported by the public sector or the private sector. And the second thing, and I think the most important, is to create a robust and coherent way of connecting innovators with markets. Because at the end of the day, what we need is not innovations. It is businesses and economic growth. And so there must be a way of converting these innovations into business and economic growth. So the government can work in various ways in creating that supportive environment. And the diagram I've drawn here is that we can drive the market in a number of ways. The ones I can mention is by being a customer. So you need sufficient demand in the market to drive. And often the biggest customer could be the government itself. And we have the digital literacy program where we have already purchased more than 1 million devices for primary schools. That is enough demand to drive development and production of devices in Kenya alone. And of course, this will eventually grow to the export market. So as well as being a customer, we can also be a policy maker. Just by creating a policy on ICT in education, that already drives demand for devices, for content, and for all associated. So I'm just using ICT in education as an example, but of course, health, energy provision, network provision, and ICT Authority currently project manages the national fiber backbone. And this is already 9,000 kilometers of fiber. That drives demand. We're a customer. It also helps us to drive policy that can also grow the market. Lastly, of course, you want to be an exporter. So trade diplomacy is also extremely important. And trade communication, really telling the stories, and I believe that is part of what we're doing today, is extremely important in helping our innovators, our SMEs grow beyond just our local market. So I'll stop there, Dr. Wanjagi, and if you want to ask something else, I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gitau. You've really explained and given us a great landscape around what has been done, where we've come from, and where we're going. I just want to ask 2 questions that will help contextualize what you've very well explained to us. So the first one is the credit guarantee scheme. I know that it doesn't sit within your purview, but one of the conversations that we constantly have with startups, entrepreneurs, small businesses is how do I access the credit guarantee scheme, and how does that work? What are some of the requirements? And I know you can go through everything in detail, but could you give us a sense of who it focuses on, and if, for example, the entrepreneurs that are currently on this call want to access, what are some of the things that they need to be looking for? And then the second question is around bureaucracy. And one of the things that government agencies and ministries are famous for is bureaucracy. What are some of the things, Dr. Gitau, that you are doing to reduce that, so that there is access to your office, access to the conversations that will help build this ecosystem? Over to you, Dr. Gitau.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wanjagi, for those 2 questions. I believe the credit guarantee scheme is something which is in the future. It is part of the startup bill of 2020, so it needs to be passed into law. But maybe I can explain a little bit of the thinking behind it, which is that accessing money, especially when you're borrowing or you're looking to be funded, most people who will give you some money require some kind of guarantee, because of course there's a risk that they'll not get their money back. And when you come to the innovation area, the risk is quite high because, as I said earlier, an innovation is something that is very new. So the idea of the credit guarantee scheme is to help those innovators that do not have other sources of guarantee, such as title or fixed deposits or any of the other instruments that financiers normally require in order to reduce the risk of the lending. The government itself can now step in and reduce the risk of other lenders by saying we guarantee that we will step in if this innovator has difficulty in paying. And of course, the government itself cannot make this a free-for-all because then it would just become free money. So you would have, as an innovator, to also prove that you're serious, that you have a good innovation that has a reasonable chance of success, that you are creditworthy through your own character and honesty and seriousness, as well as your future prospects. So I'd say this is what a credit guarantee scheme is about. Obviously, there are already nascent opportunities, which later I think my head of innovation, Kevin Atibu, may be better placed to advise innovators. And there you talked about bureaucracy, which was your second question. The ICT authority is very, very accessible. So we receive walk-ins, we receive emails, and we are very accessible. So you can actually come in, tell us what your need is, and our innovation department will be happy to give further guidance on currently available sources of funding and future plans, as well as those which are most appropriate for your specific needs. Now, sometimes you talk about bureaucracy, but remember there's also a legal framework, and we have laws on procurement. We also have opportunities such as the Access to Government Procurement Program, which favors youth, women, and people with disabilities. So there are both opportunities, but there are also barriers. So we are working very hard, first of all, to identify any barriers that make it difficult for us to procure innovations and to use innovations in our environment. Secondly, to educate innovators about standards so that they have already negotiated the most obvious barriers. So we've worked with Kenya Bureau of Standards and others to make sure that at least people are educated about which standards they must meet and so on, so that this does not become a barrier. And then finally, we are discussing with universities how to navigate some of the legal hurdles and barriers that stand in the way of the consumption of innovation. So bureaucracy is not just people being difficult. It usually means there's a barrier in our ecosystem which we have to navigate. And that means working together both to identify the barriers and to find ways of navigating them. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gitao. Really well done, explained, and really helping the entrepreneurs to understand the government's role, what the government is doing, and what the government will do in the future. I hope, with your permission, and you can share the head of innovations email and contact information, because there's there's a lot of questions that are coming from the Q&A, but also a lot of the expectations from our entrepreneurs was around the government and how the government can support them. So hopefully that you can share with us some of that information and people that can work with our entrepreneurs. Thank you so much. I want to move to Andrietta because of the capital conversation. So we began talking about the credit guarantee scheme and really the conversation around capital, access to funding. A lot of questions and a lot of comments around most of the entrepreneurs are around where do I get access to funding? How does that look like? You've heard of the government's credit guarantee scheme. So really, if you could help us, give us a perspective of where you think from a capital perspective, the funding and expenditure of the Kenyan innovation ecosystem is right now. We have about 10 years. What do we need to do, Andrea?
Great. Good morning, everybody. So in terms of where we are in Kenya, in terms of the funding opportunity for innovation and technology, if you think of one as being random sources of capital and five being a deep and diverse ecosystem with several sources of capital, my sense is that we are at stage number three, which is a place where there is some capital. It's growing, but it's not yet at the quantum that's required for a stage 5 type of ecosystem. And when you think about, I think we're 10 years into. If you mark say 2010 as the starting of the tech ecosystem with the founding of the iHub and working spaces to support entrepreneurs, I think a lot of progress has been made in terms of capital that's being raised by funders. So I think as of last year, when you look at different types of reports that try to gather data on how much capital was raised for startups that are operating in Kenya, last year it ranged anywhere from $140 million to $500 million. This year, it's north of $200 million. And this is over 50 startups, which is still a small subset of the many startups that are looking for capital. But I think this is fairly significant. I mean, when we started on this journey, even as TLCom, the amounts were sub 5 million, 10 million, and that has close to 10x over the last couple of years. So I think from that perspective, we made significant progress. And I think it's also just a testament to the fact that, investors are seeing return. They can see Kenya, they can see Africa as a viable tech ecosystem to be able to support and be able to extract return from. What we do see, though, within the funding ecosystem, is that the majority of capital is coming from outside investors. So even when you look at our fund, our investor, we're managing a $71 million fund, but the vast majority of our investors are not African investors or African institutions. We have 2 African institutions, but outside of that, we don't have any others. So, and then even when you look within the startups, the larger rounds are being raised by capital from outside, which I think, in the long term is we really do need to extract and be able to get local individuals to come in as angel investors at the early stage. We need local institutions and pension funds to come in and invest in companies or in funds such as ourselves. So I think that's one thing that needs to change within the ecosystem, trying to see how can we get more local sources of capital for our startups. Also because, the local people also better understand the ecosystem and the terrain, right? So if you're trying to pitch your business and then you're also pitching Kenya or pitching Africa to an investor, the likelihood of winning that investor over is very hard. Whereas if maybe you're just showing up and they understand Kenya, they understand Africa, or have a good sense of Africa, and all you're doing is pitching your business, that's, you have a greater chance of success in that respect. I think also what we see, so we invest anywhere from seed stage up to Series B as we follow on with our investments. And what we find is that at the earlier stage, there are a few more players, but as you go further down and your company is growing, we see fewer and fewer players in that space. I think if I think about who are the African-based funds that can write a $5 million check, I can count them on my hands, on my 2 hands if I'm super lucky. So there is still a capital gap in that respect. So that's my view in regards to to where we are as an ecosystem, but significant progress has been made for the Africa tech VC ecosystem and Kenya specifically. I think the other piece of the discussion is around what should we do next, right? Like how can we, for the next couple of years, how can we make this ecosystem better and increase funding to startups? The first thing that I would say is really around we need to show that Africa, like there is when an investor invests, you get a return because capital is following return. And the type of, and I think the type of capital that Africa needs is the type of capital that's looking for return. It's illegal and it's legitimate to do charity and to do other social stuff, but if you're looking for larger checks and larger investments that will really drive the private sector in Africa, then we need to show we can provide return. And I think private sector development is the way that we will develop our country and the continent at large. So I think the first thing that we need to see is more exits. It is still an early ecosystem, but last year was a fantastic year for Africa, substantial exits that we saw on the continent. In Kenya, we had Direct Pay Online that was acquired by Network International for $288 million. We saw in Nigeria, Paystack being acquired by Stripe for $200 million. In South Africa, there's a car platform company that was acquired called We Buy Cars. It was acquired by Transaction Capital for $220 million. So, and this all happened during a pandemic, right? So I think when you start seeing exits in the hundreds of millions of dollars, you turn the heads of international investors and hopefully also the heads of local investors to say what is happening in this space. There is an opportunity to make a return. So I think, the onus is on the entrepreneurs as well as on us as investors as we support the entrepreneurs to show that there is return, a commercial return that one can get from investing in tech VC companies. And then the second thing that I would say that would also help grow our ecosystem is around local capital. I think we need more local, whether it's local angels, local institutions, pension funds, asset managers, taking a closer look at these asset classes that are outside of their sphere. Typically they're doing bonds, they're doing publicly listed equities, but can you also look at, asset classes such as venture capital or private equity funds? And I think we need more capital from local players, because I think it also gives international investors confidence, because they're like, well, you live in the market. So if you can write a check into a fund, a check into a company, then that means there's something there, because international investors don't have the local know-how that the local investors do. So I think if I know there's a lot of work happening around that in different associations around how do you educate and increase awareness for different asset classes outside of the traditional ones. And also from a legal standpoint, how do you allow asset managers to be able to allocate capital to vehicles such as ourselves, where a fund is you're in for about 10 years. So I think that's the second thing. And then I think the final thing that I'll add in just regards to how to attract more capital, I think fundamentally it's about having strong entrepreneurs. If there are no entrepreneurs, then there's no need for capital, right? So if we can, build an ecosystem where we're able to churn out strong entrepreneurs who are solving business, who are building companies that are solving compelling challenges on the continent with very innovative business models and are able to execute, supported by strong teams, then capital will follow. So I think also a huge part of capital coming to a market is really around having strong entrepreneurs within the ecosystem.
Andretta, thank you so very much. You've really explained that conversation around capital very well. And I know I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, why aren't local investors investing? Is it an awareness problem? Is it that they don't see the investment or return, or what is it? Because, like you're saying, we really need to push that conversation. What do you think is the reason they're not?
So there are many reasons, but I'll try to be short. I think so. There's a piece around One, it's not understanding the asset class, because it is a new asset class for many of the asset managers. So they are more, they know equities, they know bonds, so they more push towards that. When you think about Africa angel investors, so the individuals, the challenge there is typically that people are investing in real estate, they are investing in land, in apartments and the like. So things they know they can touch. Now, if you show up as a tech entrepreneur and you're pitching an idea, there's nothing they can see, there's nothing they can really touch. There's a bit of a disconnect. So you find that, there's old money which is trying to be matched with these new innovative ideas, and there's a bit of a disconnect in that respect.
Thank you, Andretta. Thank you for your time. I know you may need to step out. If there are any questions, I think they'll be channeled to you at some point. But thank you so much for really explaining this conversation around capital. I want to move to Sheena. And Sheena, we've had a little bit about capital, we've had about government, we've had about the people. And just before we talk with Jack Ngare around the networking, let's talk a little bit about the know-how. And so what is the level from a know-how perspective of Kenya's innovation ecosystem now? And looking at the 10 years that are left, what are some of the things that we should focus on? Sheena, karibu.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, and sort of great question. Before I answer the question, a lot of mention has been made about kind of capital and angel investing. And I just kind of wanted to say that the UK Kenya Tech Hub with Victoria Ventures, which is one of the leading angel networks here in Kenya, we've actually released an angel investing guide, which kind of addresses some of the questions Andrietta has mentioned. How do you invest? How do you know how much money to put in, etc.? I'll be happy to share the link, and we can obviously share it with the participants. But that's so that can really help, I hope, help local angel investors invest in startups. We've also started a program following the success of that, where we're training 20 Kenyan angels, high net worth individuals, to actually start investing in entrepreneurs. And I'm hoping that some of the WhiteBox entrepreneurs will be the ones we get to, that will get to sort of meet with the angels once this program is over. So there's a lot of issues in that space, and we are definitely also working on it. So kind of watch this space. In terms of the capacity building question, I think really, really good question. And similar to the others, I think I'm around the kind of 2 to 3, which is the building and experimenting phase. I think Kenya has moved on in the last 10 years. And just if we look at just the number of organizations that are available, that are, sort of doing and providing capacity building, whether that's hubs, incubators, accelerators, I think previously we saw there was quite a few of them, and they were kind of centered in Nairobi. What I'm really excited to see over the last 7 years is there's been a change, and we're seeing associations, hubs, etc. set up, beyond Nairobi, because let's not forget, entrepreneurs are not just in Nairobi, they're all across Kenya, and they all kind of need that support to grow and scale. So we've got organizations like the Countrywide Association, which basically has, hubs across Kenya from Mount Kenya. We're kind of visiting there with our High Commissioner in a couple of weeks to see the innovations coming from there. Kisumu, Eldo Hub in Eldoret. So lots of things are happening. I think what we need to kind of now get to is this sort of phase of understanding what's going to work for Kenya. We need to stop thinking that the Silicon Valley model, or the model that's been working, across in different countries, in the West, is going to work here. As much as we talk about, Africa as the new market, and we say, entrepreneurs are, they've got a huge market to target. I mean, entrepreneurs in Kenya, in Africa, they have a really, really tough job, because it's not just building one business, it's actually building, I would say, like 4 businesses. So if you're, for example, a startup and you're trying to solve a particular problem, you don't just have to deal with that problem. You actually sometimes have to build the whole infrastructure, maybe the whole, last mile, the distribution chain, etc., in that one business. So it's actually very, very difficult for entrepreneurs to really grow and to really kind of grow and scale. So sometimes maybe the models of capacity building and support that have worked elsewhere might not work here. And therefore, I think, we really have to start thinking more about experimentation and say what works. Is it, a lot of it is kind of knowledge, and I'm really beginning to move towards this source of, let's move on towards open source knowledge, which is what the WhiteBox is around. Although we're training 150 entrepreneurs, the high growth entrepreneurs, all of this information, all the webinars that we're doing, and we're doing a lot of them, from growth hacking to digital marketing to product market fit to financing, finance models, all of them are being recorded and they're going to be live on the WhiteBox. We want to make information available to all entrepreneurs when they need it, how they need it. I think making information available is just step one. The bit that takes us to the next level then is the practical element. How do you use that, and how do you use that information in your business? So for example, in the high growth program stage, we're experimenting with a model where we're saying, what we want to try and understand is, what are the needs of an entrepreneur? Where are you kind of struggling? And how can we help you with that? How can our program partners actually help? Whether if you're thinking about a product, how do we help you develop that product or design that product or test that product so that we know that your customer will actually like it, will actually pay for it, it's something that they need, and not just something that you've decided as an entrepreneur that you want to do because you have an interest. Let's say you want to enter into a new market. How do we help with that? So I think a lot of the times what we realize is the value add in terms of helping a business grow is very, very kind of business specific. So then the question then becomes, if you're going to have to spend all this time doing one-on-ones, is that actually scalable? Because another thing is, we do need to think about, how do we scale the support? So I think a tiered approach, which is there needs to be some information, and this is what we're modeling with the WhiteBox, which is a tier one approach, which is, here's the information, here's webinars, here's etc. for everybody to learn, and you do it at your own pace. Then the second step is then really based on your needs analysis and say, okay, what do you need? Is there about 5 or 6 of you who potentially want to do product market fit? Are there about 5 or 6 of you who are really struggling to raise financing? And then bunch those entrepreneurs up in groups and then teach them in 2 ways. One, peer-to-peer learning. I think just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you don't have much to teach. I'll be honest. If I give you sort of my background, I was a lawyer in London for 10 years. I have an MBA. I've now working for I've worked for an angel investor. I'm now working for the UK government. But the lesson in which, the job in which I think I learned the most was my failed entrepreneurship. So when I moved back to Kenya about 7 years ago, I started my own insurtech startup and failed. But what I learned in that startup is more than what I've learned in my entire career as a lawyer and my MBA combined. With that learning, I was really able to support entrepreneurs in my job after that. So I think let's realize that entrepreneurs can teach entrepreneurs as well, and that's a good model. Now, the difficulty with that comes in, obviously, the trust element. Entrepreneurs need to be able to trust each other. A lot of the times I speak to entrepreneurs and they're really scared to share failings because they think it reflects badly on them. It doesn't. Actually, people are more likely to invest in people who have failed. If you look at some of the biggest entrepreneurs out there, they failed before they got to where they did. So I think we need that culture of experimentation and failure. Secondly, you can learn from each other. So for example, one entrepreneur may be very good at like the tech side or product development, but other entrepreneur may be awesome at fundraising. So learn from each other and learn from each other's experiences, learn from each other's pitfalls, what didn't work, what worked. So again, as part of this program, we're trying to do a lot of kind of that peer-to-peer learning. And I think that's really, really important. Thirdly, I think is a really, really important point, which is the linkages, network and market linkages. Sometimes we all talk about sort of training, but the best way to train and the best way sometimes to learn is by doing. So there's a reading element, there's like a training element, but there has to be a real practical element. Now, how do we have that practical element? And that's help them do it, help them start, help them work, and then finally link them up. So for example, if an entrepreneur is struggling with a product, link them to an audience so that they can get that insights, link them with that customer or link them. And I think making those network linkages is going to be extremely important. So I think that's the stage we're in. I think we are experimenting, like we said, with the WhiteBox. And I think there's lots of really exciting things happening right now in Kenya that we should be really proud of. But there's a lot to learn. And I think, let's be confident about that. Let's be confident that we have lots to offer. And let's be humble in that we have lots to learn. And let's take egos out of it and learn from each other and trust each other and grow, businesses that will solve our development challenges and create lots of jobs for the rest of us, for the youth who are coming up.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you very much for really quickly and clearly explaining where we are from a know-how perspective and where we need to go. And you actually talked about connecting, which is where we need to go. And Jack will be probably really building around that a little bit more. But my question, very quick question to you is that there's a lot of information that sits in very different places. And I think you mentioned the knowledge base and mentorships and things like that, and a structure. How do we put a structure around collecting all these pieces of information so that there's almost a one-stop place that entrepreneurs can go to, rather than picking different things from various portals, knowledge bases? How can we kind of put a structure around that real quick, Sheena? You're on mute.
Sorry. So that's a brilliant question. Actually, that's the one that we just brainstormed with the WhiteBox team last week. And I'm in two minds, and I'm going to give you both sides. First of all, I think I love the idea of a one-stop shop, and I've tried the idea of a one-stop shop, and I have really, really tried. Now, let me tell you, the convenience of the one-stop shop really works. Let me tell you the problems with that. First of all, it becomes yet another platform to attract people to come to. And so people are like, well, why should I come? It gets hard to get that message to people that you should come here because this is a one-stop shop. Secondly, most people, I've realized, and this is either as an organization, ourselves, we have this thing where we want to be seen to show, I call it vanity metrics. We like to show what we have done, which means rather than kind of working together, everybody wants to do their own thing. And that's fine. And I understand that, because obviously everybody has their own reporting, their own funders. And so it's really, really difficult for people to just share. As much as we say we want to collaborate, actually, it's very, very difficult because a lot of people are also competing. So for example, universities have a lot of information, but their value proposition is to show they have the best information. So they don't actually want to share their best information in a platform where everybody can access. They want people to come to them. So I think, as much as in theory it sounds great to have a one-stop shop, and I would love to come up with a solution, and because we have awesome minds on this, I think be great to brainstorm. I think, why not do the opposite? Instead of creating a one-stop shop, why don't we break the silos? So one of the ideas that we had was, we've got existing platforms, we've got WhatsApp groups, we've got LinkedIn groups, we've got Facebook groups. Why not get people from each of those groups? So I've seen on Facebook there's 10 entrepreneur groups. On LinkedIn there's 5 entrepreneur groups, investor groups. On WhatsApp, I'm personally part of, an IoT group, a gamers group, a Kenya tech entrepreneurs group, lots of women groups. So why not create a network of network? And this is a conversation we had with the SME advisory office that's advising the president. But why not create a few people from each of those groups and create a network of networks? So for example, a person I know, and I always reference him, is Michael Onyango. And what he's created is, he says, all we want to do is share opportunities. So why not, every time we come up with an opportunity, share it on our own various groups and cascade that information? So I think the idea is, I would love to create a one-stop shop, but right now, let's try and break the barriers and understand what information actually exists, because most entrepreneurs don't know how much information there actually is. Let's find a way to get that information to people, whether it's through existing channels, etc. And then once we know it, streamline it. And that comes from both the people providing the information and the people who are receiving the information. There's so many people, like donors, funders, universities, who have a lot of information, but the majority of the people don't have access to it. So I think it's a supply and demand side, and we have to figure out, how do we break the silos? How do we break the barriers? And if we can do that, then we can move on to the next step. But if any of you brilliant entrepreneurs and clever people on this panel or have ideas on a one-stop shop, I love it. I've tried it. I personally have not been able to do it, but I love the idea. But I think my practical thing is, let's start breaking the barriers and sharing the information that we have, because there's a lot that we do have.
Absolutely. Indeed, how do we break those barriers? Because then we can help. All of us are looking to support and help the entrepreneurs. I've worked with Michael Onyango, and I know that he's doing a wonderful job, and I'd love to be part of that conversation around how do we build something that that supports our entrepreneurs holistically. Thank you so much, Sheena. You've really provided us a lot of thoughtful conversation around where to go next. And I'd like to welcome our final panelist, Mr. Jack Ngare, who's the MD for Microsoft Africa Development Center. And Sheena just talked about linkages, which really feeds into your conversation, Jack, around networking and bringing people together. And even the conversation we were talking about, one-stop shop, really talks around, Jack, how do we bring people together, have a conversation? And Sheena's thoughts are, she'd love it, but you can see how instead of us cooperating and collaborating, we are looking at each other as competitors. So as you provide your perspective, perhaps you can also pick up Shina's conversation. So just where are we from a networking perspective, and where should we look to be going in the next 10 years as we get into 2030? Karibu Jack.
Great to see you again, James. And thanks a lot to the WhiteBox team for inviting me. I'd have to say that I don't want to sound a little bit contrarian, but I actually see the stages as more of a spectrum than a discrete level of stages that we move from, let's say, stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. I think we display hues across all the stages. Having said that, I actually do agree with the rest of the panel. Our darker hues are probably between 2 and 3. And 3 is for me being a biased sort of assessment, because it says that R&D centers for multinational corporates are established in the market, and clearly Microsoft has made an investment here in Kenya and in Lagos, Nigeria, to build an engineering practice, building global products, and it's doing quite well. Now 170 engineers is sitting in Kenya with open positions of something like 200. So, that creates a lot of job opportunities for a lot of the, self-taught and university-taught computer science students to work for a huge organization. But having said that, looking at, for example, the spectrum of 1, in the beginning stages, we still do have a lot of, Nairobi centricity. I do know there's a lot of things that's happening in the counties, and they're trying to do their own sort of set of innovations and entrepreneurial activities. However, most of them are still targeting to eventually come all the way to Nairobi for investment and for funding, etc. And it would be nice to see a lot of investment being homebred in those counties, and counties actually working with each other rather than coming to Nairobi. So you would find, for example, Nyandarua County working directly with Kisumu County. They don't need to really have Nairobi as the center of where they collaborate. And so you find places like that. That's one. On the flip side, you'd find places where we're fairly advanced as Kenya, in financial services. We are probably a 4, because pretty much every single organization has gone through the motions of going mobile, democratizing a lot of the financial services, and we're pretty advanced. So having looked at it, we're probably sitting at a 2 to 3, but we have stages where we're at 4 and others we're at 1. And I suppose the way to go is to always invest more into the 1s, to move them closer to the 2s and 3s, and then the 4s, keep them going, so we keep improving on our bottom line. My question specifically was to do with networks, and I'm just piggybacking on what the earlier discussion was of, how do you get a one-stop shop, and how do you create a network that's sustainable? I think that's the key thing. How do you create a network that's not only sustainable, but is actually beneficial to those who are within that ecosystem? And I see it in 3 ways. A network has to be self-organizing. So I'm a strong believer in entrepreneurs coming together on their own volition and sharing knowledge. And now that's easier to say than done, because we always say that people look at each other as competition. By nature, Kenya is an entrepreneurship country. We don't have oil. We have a little bit of it, but not significant. We don't have gold, significant amounts, or diamonds. So we rely a lot on our trade and commerce with our partners, and as well as tourism. All those are entrepreneurship driven, and not really state driven. And so you look at a situation where we have to be self-organizing to get ourselves together. Someone mentioned to me this morning, the Tokyo Olympics is in June. If I asked anyone on this forum, are you worried about getting marathon runners in June? We are not, because that whole ecosystem has self-organized. It's working. Eventually we get our best runners to go and represent the country at the Olympics. And so in the tech industry, it's getting there as well, that it's self-organizing. People are sharing information to a large extent. There's a little bit of plagiarism across. That's something that has worked in let's say a business model that has worked for one person will be copied to another, but that is expected. People will always do that, and people will always do some sort of sharing of ideas and copying of ideas, which is all good ultimately, because it helps the overall ecosystem grow. And so you need to allow an ecosystem to self-organize, and entrepreneurs need to go out of their way to self-organize. I remember back in a previous role I had, we were struggling with some engineering problems. And what was interesting, the country we went to, which was Taiwan, is that when the company couldn't sort out that problem, it was simply a phone call to their competitors and ask them, hey, can you solve this problem with your platform? And they were like, yes, we could solve it. And the business was passed through their competitors. And that sort of way of self-organizing and having a single voice is always a good way to go. The second thing I have to say, other than self-organizing, it has to be self-propagating. And this kind of requires primers of all the previous things that the other panelists have spoken about, whether it's funding to propagate a network. You definitely need funding. And I like what Andrietta said, we can't keep looking for funding from abroad. We need to start mobilizing our local investors, that there are alternative ways to invest into startups. Obviously, the tradition here is that as soon as you get a bunch of cash, is to invest into apartments and farms, etc. So that particular paradigm has to shift, that there is other ways of doing it. And it's actually just a consequence of seeing the kind of investments that are coming in from outside the country. So people selling out their businesses, like Cellulant selling it for X $million. And then all of a sudden you'll see a lot of local entrepreneurs saying, hey, there's actually an opportunity here to make more money out of it. The other thing I'd like to say is, also building the skill sets and the work ethos of a self-propagating of a network. It is important that happens. In many cases, you'd probably find that the network itself may not necessarily be staffed enough with the kind of skill sets to accomplish certain tasks. So it's important that a lot of collaboration with universities, with people like us at Microsoft, to help skill up the whole community to be able to address the challenges that they have. And the last thing I just want to say is, to have a sustainable network of entrepreneurs, you definitely need it to be self-regulating. And here I put a caveat, and in quotation marks. I'm a big proponent of networks that are able to self-organize, self-propagate, and regulate themselves. Like you create a code of conduct that we cannot do this and we cannot do that. And you see this a lot in, especially, I'll pick an example, in big tech companies such as Microsoft and Google and Facebook. They've come up with a code of conduct for responsible AI. That there are things we will not do. All right. And so that, and now it's moving with the recent events in the US. You see some of the social media platforms also moving in that direction and saying, we will for good or bad, we will self-regulate. Now, having said that, there could be also an opportunity for the likes of the government to regulate certain sectors, and it is their responsibility to do so, to protect the common citizenry. But it has to be done with a measure of a lot of stakeholder engagements. I pick an example. Obviously there's a lot of hue and cry about the digital service tax that's affecting a lot of entrepreneurs in the digital space. It could be a challenge for sure. But if you think of it, the 1.5 digital service tax that is being levied vis-a-vis the changes in the forex exchange that happened between last year and this year is about 10%, actually heading towards 11% in terms of the absolute number of increase in costs when you're doing an online transaction, 11% vis-a-vis the digital service tax, that's 1.5%. I always believe the question is not really in terms of the amount. Perhaps it's more of the perception that in a nascent industry and in a nascent network that's been established in ecosystem, is the right view to perhaps create a certain barrier or a certain perception or the optics of it, that we are now being taxed about it. Maybe that's an open question behind it, and not necessarily the 1.5 value. I think it's more of the question of what are the optics behind it. And the same thing you'll apply to things like the ICT practitioners bill for the entire, digital and technology landscape. Is it the right thing to have a practitioners, bill that will regulate what kind of people can innovate and participate in the digital side of things? The optics of it, the intention may be good, that, hey, we want to have credible people. But then the flip side is the optics of it, that the industry needs to also self-regulate to an extent, and the consumers need to also be there to vet and weed out the ones who are not doing the right work. So, it's always a give and take. There's some positives as well. You had Dr. Getao speak about the startup bill, the credit guarantee fund, excellent, things that will just boost the whole ecosystem altogether. So you find that that's whole self-governing ecosystem mixed with a little bit of government, steroids, always helps the industry as a whole develop a lot. Beyond that, the idea of having different people working on different things in terms of knowledge bases, similar to what was discussed earlier, will be something that is going to be there in the future. And I think it's something that should be encouraged, because you always find there would never be a one-stop shop, because every person sees things in their different view. For example, Microsoft Research that has established here is looking at sustainability of healthcare in Kenya. Can entrepreneurs build a business model that's sustainable in healthcare in Africa and India, actually? We shall see it from the perspective of how do we leverage the technologies we have, nanonize them, and democratize them, and then enable entrepreneurs to build that sort of technology in healthcare. Whereas if someone else came, a GE that's working on, let's say, dialysis machines, they will look at it from their perspective, and they will release white papers and knowledge bases based on their experiences in different counties that they've rolled out for the government. So you as an entrepreneur will pick the Microsoft Research work, you'll pick the GE work, you'll pick out maybe the Ministry of Health work, and condense that information and figure out how it works for you. I would like to say that, looking at different reports from different people is always the best way to go. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you so very much. I believe we've run out of time, but you've provided such great comments: self-organizing, self-regulating, and self-propagating. And you've mentioned two very interesting things: the practitioner's bill, perhaps as an opportunity, and the digital service tax and how it's perceived. And perhaps our Honorable Joe Mosheru will probably provide some context around that when he gives some of his remarks. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to all the panelists and for your great insights and perspectives, and that you've really helped put context to our five critical areas that we were thinking about in terms of how do we move this ecosystem forward: know-how, money, networking, people, and government. I'd like to now turn this over back to Janet. Janet, I'm sorry we've run a little bit out of time. I'm hoping we can, but I'm hoping that this conversation was really insightful for a lot of our entrepreneurs. Over to you, Janet. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Wanjagi. You always bring the conversations to the table for everyone to get involved. I really appreciate all the panelists for giving their views. And one thing I'd just like to remind everyone, like Sheena said, we need to start breaking barriers and sharing the information that we have. And this brought me back to a quote that Bill Gates once said, and this is: never before in history has innovation offered promise of so much to so many in such a short time. And this shows so much involvement already, and we'd like to get as many people involved in this journey as possible. Now, without further ado, I'd like to move us on to the next session, and this is the speeches by our VIP guests. I'd like to call on Dr. John Njenga, the Dean of the Strathmore University Business School, to give a few remarks. Dr. Njenga, are you with us?
Yes, I am, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you well.
Thank you very much, Honorable Joe Mosheru. Thank you for being here and for honoring us. ISB, obviously, and all the team behind the preparation of this, and all the panelists have had great ideas from you. The question of ecosystem technology and actual business is a pertinent issue. The question is whether we have an ecosystem or whether we don't have an ecosystem that works for our context. And after discussing this with various players in the industry and in government and in the civil society organizations and in the research phase, I felt that we are disintegrated. We have very good policies and procedures. We have institutional frameworks, but they're disintegrated, and information is disintegrated. And this is something that doesn't help entrepreneurship and innovation. The disintegration can be a positive issue. Disintegration of information, for instance, to democratize information, to democratize processes, to democratize systems from government as they affect the ecosystem. That's a good thing. The problem is that disintegration without order is complete breakdown of systems, and that can cause a very serious, how do I say, undervaluation and under entrepreneurship, and evaluation especially of capital investment in growth. So let's see, something that can be indicative of that would be good. Looking at the reports we have been studying from the International Finance Corporation, from the Central Bank of Kenya, now the data goes back to 2018. It's quite evident that that disintegration within our systems here in Africa, and more specifically here in Kenya, has resulted in a financing gap that is equivalent to $21 billion for financing of SMEs in Kenya. That is also stated as $5.2 trillion for Africa under the SME sector by the International Finance Corporation. So, but the CBK report sort of gives us an even more indicative problem. And that is, we discovered through the work we did with the Presidential Delivery Unit on SMEs, which we were co-founders for the Presidential SME Roundtable, we discovered that the highest credit offering institution in Kenya is the shopkeeper. So little credit to micro entrepreneurs stands a very high level of capital provision in this country. And far below it, far below it, are the SME service, financial banking service providers, and they're very expensive. I was computing from one bank to get operational capital. This is not capital for investment or equity or loans, long-term loans. I'm talking about working capital. The working capital cost from credit providers in the country ranges between 54% and 74%. And from our banking system, whereas they give you information about the interest rate of operating capital at the baseline, when you put all the costs together that they will charge you for that, they range between 30% and 50%, which is ridiculous for SMEs. And no matter how much technology you put into this, there's something wrong about our ecosystem, and especially an ecosystem that wants to generate innovation and youth-led enterprises, given the fact that our population is largely youthful, people who are starting up. What can we contribute as ISB and Strathmore into this question? The first thing that we agreed with, and this is for the Presidential Delivery Unit SME Roundtable run by Ann Mutahi, we actually the ones who coined the phrase network of networks when we held the last 3 SME roundtables. As a network for networks, that's where we came up. The first thing is, how does an SME or a micro enterprise in any part of this country integrate into the system? There is no way. The cost is too high. And I'm saying that practically. Yeah, I don't want to give examples because I chair quite a number of this and it is ridiculous, to tell you the truth. The second thing is, therefore, you have to have disintegrated SME business development centers that integrate everything that an SME would want in order to start and to innovate. So just to give you a little example, if you would like to set up true data and information about the county development, my humble opinion is that you have to have practical and effective application of the industrial centers in the counties and properly organized. The second thing is that you have to integrate all the systems, a sort of, in Kenya, we use the word huduma, that is to serve. A center that is a one-stop shop for information on SMEs, what they need, financing, helping them consult on financial services, support, and so on and so forth. And finally, how do you put in the institutions, and especially strategic institutions like universities, to help the community develop value chain strategies that ensure people invest in those value chains that add a comprehensive job creation platform? You see, the problem of not having a good integrated ecosystem that actually knows what it's doing is that the first thing is we don't even have good value chain analysis for each sector of our economy, and especially at the geographical disintegrated level of the county system. And I think that is one place where we are going in the next 1 year. We'll start it this year. The second thing is, how do you build good business development centers? Well, you have to integrate all the interested parties, starting with the government, going with the private sector, the bodies of the private sector that should be feeding in information into these systems like KEPSA and so on and so forth, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Then the third area is the civil society organizations. Why are these so important? Because these ones give you the gender sensitivity of economic growth, gaps in the economic growth, difficulties of getting security for capital, and so on and so forth. So how do you develop good cooperative systems that can support each SME that doesn't have good asset-based securitization? And moreover, if we connect the Huduma registering to these centers, then that means that we will have good know your customer information, APIs there. They're very, very important. And I see that the central bank has actually started a proper integration of API. As usual, we have very good ideas, but the proper integration of all that is very, very important. And then not to connect politics and business, and that can only be done at the county level. So that if we are going into the BBI, for instance, in the next 1 year or so, and then the elections in the year 2022, business processes, business innovation, and integration of markets is not significantly affected. How can we reach that level instead of seeing what we are seeing right now, that we are almost coming out of a crisis, a health crisis for that matter, but we are going straight into another crisis. For us here, it's a political crisis, investment in that. Then the other thing is, and to bring this together, you need a middle person who is agnostic, so to speak. And I think here, educational institutions and support for apex institutions that accredit these business centers and develop training systems and integrate information and courses from all over has to be developed freely. Each person has to do what they want, but frankly speaking, we have to find an ecosystem channel that is sufficiently effective without destroying freedom and over legalizing business so that people can't work. And then finally, the issue of supporting the value chain networks. We've just done several value chain. One of them that is very important is the livestock value chain, and we specifically went to meet with the Kenya Meat Commission, and we had a very good conversation with Honorable Matiang'i and the support they're giving the Kenya Meat Commission, and also the poultry one, which left so many things untouched. But the summary of it all is origination, capacity to ensure quality, supporting each aspect of the value chain. And now I finish my speech by saying, well done, ladies and gentlemen, for the great ideas. But we still have a long way to build at least 2 or 3 fantastic ecosystems that touch every human being in the country that are inclusive. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nyanka, for your great remarks. And now I'd like us to move on to our next 2 speakers. And we'll try to ensure we keep time because I can see we are over time now. Yes, so I'd like to call on to Sheena Raikundalia to introduce the next speaker. Sheena, are you with us?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Hi, I didn't realize I was doing this, but yeah, I'm really conscious that we're short on time, so I'm going to keep this very, very short, but I'm extremely excited to introduce our Deputy High Commissioner to Kenya, Josephine Gold. So if you'd like to just start. Thanks.
Hi. I'll try and keep it short because I know time is pressing and I'm sure everyone's starting to think about lunch. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the launch today. I know I'm preaching to the converted when I say that in the fast-changing world, technology affords us the opportunity to do much more, both as individuals and in collaboration with others. And technology gives us the power to include and to reach and to inspire and to communicate and educate and to change really the world we're living in. And during the COVID crisis, it's really shown us that going digital is no longer simply part of how we conduct our day-to-day activities, but it's also become the bedrock of all of our economic activities. So technology can be a great enabler, can be really ensure that key services such as health, education, finance and energy reach all of those who need it most, even during a global pandemic. And it's something we've really seen a lot in the last few months, over the last year. In the UK, we're really proud of our history of digital innovation, which dates back to the earliest days of computing, and also including the development of the World Wide Web, which has laid the foundations for today's thriving global digital economy. And that's a lot of the sort of rationale behind what we're doing here, and the support we've been giving to the WhiteBox initiative, because we think technology can be a real driver for both jobs and investment. The digital sector in the UK now employs about 1.5 million people. And Kenya, of course, has got a really well-established international reputation for being at the cutting edge of developing and using innovative digital technology in Kenya and in Africa and beyond. As the UK, we've obviously got a long partnership, a long history of working closely with Kenya, whether it's through business, through development, or also building those links between people. Science, technology, and innovation remain really extremely important for us as part of this relationship. And we see the digital economy as a very exciting growth area for the UK-Kenya partnership. Last year in January, the governments of Kenya and the United Kingdom agreed a framework for the UK-Kenya strategic partnership, which is aimed at focusing our collective expertise, resources and leadership around 5 strategic pillars, one of which is all about people-to-people links, which is all about education, skills, science, research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So programs such as WhiteBox, which is really specifically focused on supporting entrepreneurs who are developing solutions to development challenges and creating jobs, are really at the heart of what we're seeking to do as part of our UK-Kenya partnership. This project's really exciting because it brings together entrepreneurs, investors, mentors, and government to help the entrepreneurs grow, scale up, and it once again shows why Kenya is referred to as the Silicon Savannah. I'd just like to finish by underlining how delighted we are to be working together with the government of Kenya through WhiteBox initiative to support 150 entrepreneurs. I want to wish you all success in your endeavors. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, the UK Deputy High Commissioner Josephine Gold. I'd now like to call upon Dr. Catherine Gitao, who was in our panel discussion, to introduce the CS.
Okay, thank you very much, Janet. It is my pleasure and privilege this morning to request our Cabinet Secretary of the Ministry of ICT and Youth Affairs, Honorable Joe Mucheru, to address us with the keynote speech. I know he's very passionate about innovation, so we really look forward to your remarks, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gitao. And thank you for earlier already talking about what we're doing as government. So it also saves me some time so that I can focus on some of the core key areas. Josephine Gold, the Deputy High Commissioner of the United Kingdom, our great partner, Sheena, Dr. George Jenga, all other panelists and distinguished participants, good morning. I'm really happy to be here this morning and really to listen to the different presentations that are being done, but also to just see a milestone happening in this country where many of our young businesses, startups are coming together, the whole idea of the network that is being discussed coming together, and really with the support of the UK Tech Hub and all the other partners that we have, Strathmore, Kijiji, that we can now be able to bring everyone in one place and really have these discussions about how we grow this ecosystem, how we make it expand, and really growing the idea of the WhiteBox, which is something that we really feel very strongly about. The Silicon Savannah is a term that has been used even during this forum, but where do you invest? How do you find out what companies are doing what? So this is the framework that we're working on to ensure that we provide that opportunity for investors, the opportunity for even the businesses, the startups, to see what is the path, what is the direction that we can take and move forward. So before I go into a speech, which really I don't want to read, I want to discuss some of the key areas that were brought up. For instance, the digital tax. For those of you that are here, it's a good thing that we now have a digital tax because one, it means the sector is growing and it's being recognized by other sectors that we need to be contributing to the economy and to the growth. But more importantly, the digital tax is also targeting, big companies that are doing business in Kenya and they are not paying their taxes. So we are managing that. If you go into more details, you'll find that if you've paid your corporation tax, you can deduct the digital tax. So it affects maybe those that don't pay corporation tax but are operating in the market. And I'm sure they currently know themselves. We've heard about the ICT practitioners bill. It is not one that is government-led. This is actually a private members bill that's coming from the Senate. The previous one that had come, we did not support the structure that had been put in place. And we're still not convinced yet as government that this is the direction we want to take. We want to see the innovations happen and grow. We don't want to put some of the restrictions. Companies know how they recruit, who they are recruiting. And yes, I understand that we have requirements on how you rate. For instance, if there's a web designer, if they come, how do you know whether they really can do the work? You only rate after you've paid them, and then the quality is later. I think there are systems that are already coming up that will allow you to be able to rate and know how people work. And we will work consultatively with the sector and the industry. And we can then decide this is how a practitioner's bill will be done. I think the current framework that has been put in place is not one that we as government currently support. And so we are working on ensuring we put the right structures in place. I had wanted to hear from the participants, the panelists, that BBI is an opportunity to also present some of these needs and requirements that we have as a country, as a sector, so that we start enshrining, Kenya being a digital hub, as part of even our constitution. So I've not had that discussed, but I think it creates a very big opportunity for this sector. We've hired people to verify signatures. Had we already implemented the Huduma number, it would not have taken this long for us to verify whether those signatures are correct and so on. And as a country, we are digitizing. We're moving in a way where we're providing the platform or let's say the marketplace, the network that you can then build the startups on. And so it's an exciting time for us. And so as we roll out the Huduma number, as the BBI comes in, I hope, even though it is seen as a political activity, that we in this sector should get involved in some of these political activities because they significantly affect how the sector works and the way also government works. Government is the largest consumer at the moment. We want that to reduce so that private sector expands and grows, so that even if government consumption increases, the private sector increases even more. And then we see our sector growing and contributing even further. We did undertake a census, so it's given us some very good data. And at the moment, we have almost real-time data that is available on what's happening in the country. And with information, we can be able to innovate. We can be able to see where challenges are and come up with the solutions that are needed. And so let me first also take this opportunity to thank all those that have applied and are now participating in this forum, so that they are able to get the mentorship, they're able to get the support, whether it's at the growth stage or at the early stage, and they are able to really now start working together. This network means amongst these startups, you can be able to create a market amongst yourselves, you can be able to provide support to each other and really see the Silicon Savannah take off and grow in a way that will work for us. We as government will continue to grow in the digital sector and provide opportunities for the private sector. For instance, the digitization we are currently undertaking under the Ministry of Lands. As we make all title deeds, passports, all driver's licenses, as we put everything to be digital, it means then we're creating an even bigger market because every citizen is going to become digital and you'll be able to work with them. And so we want to ensure that as we're digitizing, we have local companies that are getting engaged and that are getting involved. And you cannot get engaged involved if you're not following what government is doing, if you're not following the politics of the day, so that when there are tenders out, you're also participating. Let me say our president is extremely passionate about this sector. We recently went with him to Miami, where he was launching many of the government security products that are being done by our youth and startups, ranging from digitization of maps, all the way to small arms, creation of social media platforms, and all this we want to see growing. So he's supportive, and we want to see many of these companies that are now being incubated, growing up all the way to being listed, so that then Kenyans can also participate and become owners, in one way or another of these businesses and owners of capital. Companies like Google, Facebook, all that are listed, created many millionaires and billionaires. And if we do the same with our securities exchange here, we can be able to grow many. So an exciting time, and I'm looking forward to working together. I thank the UK again for the partnership. Of course, the Deputy High Commissioner has mentioned that we have the trade agreement in place. I think that was done in record time. I think the countries have really worked together for a long time, and we hope that with that kind of base, we're going to really see the growth and expansion of this sector. And so with those remarks and the great opportunities are there, let me take this opportunity to declare the WhiteBox Entrepreneurship Partnership now officially launched. Asanteni sana and God bless.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Honorable John Musheru, for your kind remarks. We really do appreciate you taking your time to be here with us today. I'd now like to move on to our closing remarks. And I'd like to invite Freya, Victoria, Marianne, and Karina, who are part of the WhiteBox organizing team, to give the closing remarks. All right, I can see you, Freya. Great. Okay.
Yes, I'll speak on behalf of the team. This is Victoria from the KTG. All protocols observed. On behalf of the WhiteBox Entrepreneur Support Program Implementation Team, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to our honorable guest speakers, our distinguished panelists, and you, our participants, for making the time to be with us today to officially launch this program. There's been a wealth of information and knowledge shared during this webinar, and our hope is that through programs such as this one and other initiatives that we've heard about, that all this information can be harnessed towards building a stronger and more inclusive entrepreneurship ecosystem. We would finally like to encourage you to follow the different social media channels as seen on the screen for updates with regards to the WhiteBox program, as well as other opportunities that may arise in the future. With that, I'd like to say thank you once again for joining us today, and we wish you all the best for the rest of your day and for your entrepreneurship journey. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Victoria. Now, I'd just like to close off the session completely. You are now free to leave. And I'd like to thank you all for taking your time to be here with us today. And as we get back to our busy schedules, may you have a great day and a wonderful weekend. And in the spirit of experimenting, I'll leave you with a quote. "If there's a way to do it better, find it," by Thomas Edison. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to close off the session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.